You and Stewart both entered UConn in 1975. Did you have mentors in law school?
There were some professors with whom we were close, who we would hang out with. Some of the faculty members were new, who have since just retired. We're very friendly with the students, and so we had Rick Pomp for tax on Friday nights,
Right.
6 to 9, and he would hang out with the students after 9 o'clock just to kind of socialize. And so, if I had any questions, I went to them, but they were very gracious.
Did you know any women lawyers or judges at the time? Any of them help you?
One summer, I worked for a law firm in Milford, Connecticut, and there was a female attorney there who, by coincidence, ended up being my neighbor in my hometown. And she was wonderful, and I developed a great relationship with her.
Let's go to 1978 and graduation. What did you do upon graduation?
I had a clerkship for Ellen Bree Burns. That was the best 2 years of my life. I was one of her first law clerks.
Let's talk a little bit about that clerkship, because it clearly was a very important part of your life.
I fell in love with her. I fell in love with the courthouse. I fell in love with having justice as your client instead of, being a private counsel. And I knew that once I left my clerkship, that this is where I wanted to end up.
So that's 1980 when you finished your clerkship with Judge Burns. What do you do next at that point?
I went to Wigan and Dana for 5 years. I resisted being pigeonholed into one specialty. I just wanted to kind of be a jack of all trades, and so I did a lot of different things. I learned early on that litigation was not for me. It just was a lifestyle that was not going to be consistent with having a family life. Right. So by the end, I did a lot of administrative law.
How did you make the whole working mom thing work for you?
My husband, right, so when we first graduated law school, we lived in Milford. So once Aaron was born, he still got up ridiculously early and drove to work. And I did the morning shift of waking up Aaron, getting him ready for school, dropping him off at daycare, and then going to work. Then my husband could leave work promptly at 5:30, pick up Aaron, and then feed him dinner and bathe him and get him ready for bed, whereas I could work late and then come home.
So 1985, you're appointed the youngest magistrate judge in the history of Connecticut. You clerked for 2 years. You've now worked in private practice for 4 or 5 years. How'd that all come about?
Judge Burns had let me know that they were trying to get an additional magistrate judge in addition to Owen Egan and Art Latimer. And so she kind of kept me in the pipeline that this was coming down the pike. And then when the applications became open, I applied. There were 45 applications. The Merit Selection Committee interviewed 11 people, made recommendations. I was number 1 on the list, and I got it.
When you were appointed, you and Judge Burns, I believe, were the only 2 women on the federal bench in Connecticut. Today, if I look at the active bench, magistrate judges and judges, I think it's probably pretty close to 50-50. What's happened over that time?
Well, I think there's a greater acceptance and a greater sensitivity to having a more diverse bench.
Beyond the obvious demographic change, what do you think some of those benefits are?
I think women are better listeners. I think women excel at a lot of professions because of that. Doctors, lawyers, judges, professors. I think we're more pragmatic. I think we can kind of cut through the BS more rapidly. I think we're much more efficient.
What do you enjoy the most about your work?
Settlement conferences, definitely. And the messier and the more complex and the more challenging, the better. So for instance, today I was able to report 2 very big settlements, and that certainly was a high for me.
What about that makes it interesting? Why do you enjoy it?
Because it's taking chaos and making order out of it. So for instance, I had a case that involved interpleader action that probably was the most factually complex case I've had in years. I have to say, it probably was the first time in 15 years I had to take a sheet of paper and draw a diagram of who everybody was. Here's the complaint, here's the answer, here's the counterclaim, here's the third-party claim, here are the cross claims. We started the conference at 10, the attorneys, I let them kind of talk till 11, and then I said, okay, here's how I think we ought to settle the case. And they all chatted, and one of the charts made sense, and that's how we settled the case. Now, I spent probably a good 2 hours thinking it through, like what was the natural sequence here, and it worked. And so that was fun because it was a multi-million-dollar case, and the attorneys walked in and said, never thought the case would settle, and it settled, and that was fun.
Do you think that having a woman in the room running these settlement discussions is a benefit?
Definitely, definitely. And then, I've had cases, and particularly wrongful death cases, where, I've hugged litigants at the end. particularly in the wrongful death cases.
You think the empathy piece is an
Absolutely,
important piece?
absolutely, absolutely.
Tell us about some of the more sort of memorable experiences, whether they're cases or events that have occurred as being a magistrate judge.
Probably the case of which I am most proud was very early in my career, 1988. I actually still remember the docket number. There was a class action filed on behalf of inmates in the state of Connecticut who are HIV positive. And the state of Connecticut was not dealing with that issue well at all in terms of the confidentiality of the fact that people were HIV positive and the mental health treatment and the health care. Ultimately settled the case with a very, very, very long consent decree. And I learned later on that the consent decree actually became a model for other departments of corrections throughout the country of how to deal with HIV positive inmates. And so I really changed a lot of people's lives for the better.
You've served with many wonderful judges over the past 32 years. Any stories about any of the, working with any of them that you want to share?
I loved Judge Dorsey. He had a pretty gruff exterior, but he was a really sweet, gentle, kind human being. And he was also someone to whom I went frequently just to kind of bounce ideas off. And he was just a very kind, compassionate human being. And that wasn't always clear to people. But he was funny. When I first started my job, because I'm really surprised that you're doing a great job. I wasn't sure that a woman could do it, but you've proved me wrong. So I didn't know whether to hug him or slap him.
Last year, you were awarded the Connecticut Law Review Alumni Award. Do you remember in 1977 when Ruth Bader Ginsburg came to UConn to receive a similar award?
Yes, there was a dinner in her honor, and she was just remarkable. I was just so awestruck.
How did it feel almost 40 years later, be getting the same award?
That's what I mentioned, that the fact that I received the same award of her was the greatest compliment anyone could ever give me.
Has she been a role model for you?
Without a doubt.
In your early days, I'm going to assume that most of the litigants that, or the lawyers that appeared before you were probably men. Has that changed over the 30 years?
Definitely. There are a lot more. In fact, funny, we had a settlement conference with 2 women attorneys, and we settled the case in like 20 minutes. And so we joked that we negotiated like women. Again, no posturing, just cut to the chase. And then we spent the night. Then one of the attorneys said, well, I can't get back to my office this soon.
Do you think gender plays a role in judicial decision making?
Well, I think everything in your background plays a role. I mean, growing up in New Haven, going to Lee High School, going to Brandeis, I mean, I have all these experiences that make me who I am. And so I think the way I am because of everything that's ever happened in my life. So being a woman, yes, it's part of it.
I know part of your duties involve naturalizations, and I know that's got some importance to you because of your own history.
That is one of the best things of the job, because everybody walks away happy.
One of those big sessions, I think, was the largest ever in Connecticut.
Yes, it was.
You spoke at that and you said, America is hope, America is freedom, America is you. What were you telling these new citizens? My
speech generally is, it's ethnics who have made America great, and I absolutely entirely believe that. If you look at the great achievers in this country, most of them have ethnic surnames. There are 87 high-tech companies in this country with assets over $1 billion. And of the 87, 44 are owned by immigrants. Pretty amazing. The whole point is that immigrants don't take jobs away. Immigrants create jobs.